The vase hit the floor before Elena Marsh even understood what had happened. "You broke it. Look what you did." Vanessa Hart's voice cracked through the marble hallway like a whip. Her face was red, her hands were shaking, and her eyes were fixed on the shattered pieces scattered near Elena's feet. Elena had not touched the vase. She had been walking past it with a tray of clean towels when Vanessa, storming through the hallway in her heels, had knocked it off the side table herself. But there was no time to explain. Vanessa was already screaming, "Do you know how much that cost? Do you have any idea?" Vanessa's voice rose higher with every word, drawing the attention of two other staff members who peeked out from the kitchen doorway. "This is exactly why people like you should not be allowed near nice things." Elena set the tray down slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. Her heart pounded, but her face stayed calm. She had learned long ago that anger only made things worse when you had no power in the room. "I did not touch the vase, Miss Hart," Elena said quietly. "It fell when you walked past it." The words seemed to make Vanessa even angrier. "Are you calling me a liar? In my own house?" It was not her house, not yet. The wedding was still 3 months away, and the house belonged to Adrian Cole, the man Vanessa was engaged to. But Vanessa had already begun speaking as though every room, every wall, every piece of furniture answered to her. "I would never call you a liar," Elena said, keeping her voice steady. "I only meant that it was an accident." "An accident that you caused by being clumsy and careless," Vanessa snapped. She stepped closer, close enough that Elena could smell her expensive perfume mixing with the sharp edge of her fury. "I have had enough of you. Every day it is something. A stain you missed. A room you cleaned wrong. Now this." Elena said nothing. There was nothing to say that would not be twisted into something worse. "Leave my house," Vanessa shouted, the words echoing down the long hallway and up the wide staircase. "Pack your things and get out. I do not want to see your face here again." The kitchen staff froze. Even the housekeeper, an older woman named Margaret, who had worked in the Cole household for over a decade, stood still in the doorway, unsure whether to step in. Elena felt her throat tighten, but she refused to let tears show. She had a younger brother waiting for her at home, a boy who depended on the money this job brought in every week. Losing this position was not something she could afford, but there was also a limit to how much humiliation a person could swallow in silence. "I understand," Elena finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. She bent down to begin picking up the broken pieces of glass from the vase, her hands trembling slightly, despite her effort to stay composed. "Leave it," Vanessa hissed. "Just go, now." Elena straightened up. She looked at Vanessa for a long moment, and in that look was every ounce of restraint she had built over years of hard work and quiet dignity. Then she turned and walked toward the small room near the kitchen where the staff kept their coats and bags. Her hands shook as she reached for her jacket. She thought of her brother, Caleb, only 14 years old, waiting for her at their small apartment across the city. She thought of the rent that was due in 11 days. She thought of how she would explain to him that she had lost her job because a spoiled woman had knocked over a vase and blamed her for it. As she pulled her jacket over her shoulders, she heard the front door of the mansion open. Footsteps, calm and unhurried, moved across the marble floor. Then a voice, low and controlled, cut through the tension still hanging in the hallway. "What is going on here?" Elena froze. She recognized the voice, though she had rarely heard it directly. Adrian Cole. The man who owned this house, the man whose name was spoken carefully by everyone who worked for him, always with a mixture of respect and quiet fear. Elena had seen him only a handful of times in the months she had worked there, usually from a distance, usually surrounded by men in dark suits who never smiled. She had heard the whispers among the staff. Adrian Cole was not just a wealthy businessman. There were rumors about the kind of business he truly ran, rumors that nobody spoke about too loudly, rumors that made people choose their words with him very, very carefully. Vanessa's entire posture changed the moment she heard his voice. Her shoulders straightened, her chin lifted, and when she spoke again, her tone had softened into something sweet and performative. "Adrian, you are home early. I was just handling a small problem with the staff." "A small problem," Adrian repeated, his voice flat. He stepped further into the hallway, his dark eyes moving across the shattered glass on the floor, then to Vanessa, and finally landing on Elena, who stood frozen near the doorway with her jacket half on and her bag clutched tightly in her hand. "The maid broke the antique vase from the study," Vanessa said quickly, gesturing toward the broken pieces. "I told her she needs to leave. She has been careless for weeks now." Adrian did not respond right away. He crouched down slightly, studying the pattern of broken glass on the floor, the direction it had scattered, the position of the side table it had fallen from. Elena watched him, confused by his silence, unsure what he was doing. "This vase fell toward the wall," Adrian said finally, standing back up. "If someone carrying it from the tray had dropped it, the glass would have scattered forward, toward the hallway. This pattern suggests it was knocked from the table itself, not dropped by someone holding it." Vanessa's confident expression flickered for just a second. "I do not know what you mean. I was not even near the table when it happened." "Margaret," Adrian said, turning toward the housekeeper who still stood frozen in the kitchen doorway. "Did you see what happened?" Margaret hesitated, glancing nervously between Vanessa and Adrian. It was clear she did not want to be caught in the middle of whatever this was. "I saw Miss Hart walking quickly down the hallway," Margaret said carefully. "I believe her sleeve brushed against the table as she passed. Elena was several steps behind her, carrying the towels." The hallway went silent. Vanessa's face flushed, though this time it was not from anger but from being caught. "That is not what happened," Vanessa said, but her voice had lost its earlier certainty. Adrian looked at Elena again. This time, his expression was harder to read. It was not sympathy exactly. It was something more careful, more calculating, as though he was recalculating everything he thought he knew about the scene he had walked into. "You were about to leave," he said to Elena. "It was not a question. Miss Hart asked me to," Elena said quietly. "I did not want to cause any trouble." "You did not cause any trouble," Adrian said. "This is my house. I decide who works here and who does not." Vanessa's mouth opened, ready to protest, but something in Adrian's expression made her close it again. In the months she had known him, she had learned there were certain moments when arguing with him only made things worse. This, clearly, was one of those moments. "Elena," Adrian said, turning to face her fully for the first time. "Please put your things down. You still have a job here." Elena stood still, unsure if she had heard him correctly. The other staff members exchanged quiet glances, careful not to let their surprise show too openly. "Thank you," Elena managed to say, though her voice still trembled slightly from the shock of everything that had just happened in the span of a few minutes. Adrian gave a small nod, then turned his attention back to Vanessa. "We will discuss this later," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Vanessa's face had gone pale, the earlier confidence completely drained from her expression. She glanced once more at Elena, and in that glance was something colder than the anger from before. It was resentment, sharp and quiet, the kind that does not disappear just because it has been silenced for the moment. "Of course," Vanessa said stiffly. She turned and walked up the staircase without another word, her heels clicking loudly against the marble steps, each step sounding louder than the last as she disappeared from view. The hallway remained quiet for a long moment after she left. Margaret finally stepped forward and began gathering a broom to clean up the broken glass, while the other staff members slowly returned to their tasks, though the tension in the air had not fully disappeared. Elena stood near the doorway, still holding her jacket, unsure what to do next. Adrian looked at her, and for a brief moment, something in his expression softened, just slightly. "Go back to your work," he said, though his tone was gentler now. "I am sorry you were put in that position." Elena nodded, setting her bag down carefully. "Thank you, Mr. Cole." He studied her for a moment longer, as though there was something else he wanted to say, but instead, he simply turned and walked toward the study, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Elena let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Her hands were still shaking as she picked up the tray of towels she had abandoned earlier. Margaret approached her quietly, sweeping the last of the broken glass into a dustpan. "That was close," Margaret whispered, glancing toward the staircase to make sure Vanessa was truly gone. "I have never seen him step in like that before." "I did not expect it either," Elena admitted, her voice still quiet. "Be careful," Margaret said, lowering her voice even further. Miss Hart does not forget things like this, and she will not forgive you for being right in front of him." Elena knew Margaret was right. She had seen the look in Vanessa's eyes before she walked away, a look that promised this was not over, no matter what Adrian had said in the moment. But for now, Elena had her job. She had the money her brother needed. She pushed the fear aside and focused on the tray in her hands, carrying it toward the linen closet at the end of the hallway. As she walked, she could not stop thinking about the strange calm in Adrian Cole's voice, the way he had studied the broken glass like a puzzle to be solved, rather than an inconvenience to be dismissed. Everyone in the house spoke of him as someone dangerous, someone whose business dealings were better left unquestioned. Yet the man who had just walked in and quietly dismantled Vanessa's lie had done so without raising his voice even once. It did not make sense to her. But then again, very little about this house had made sense since Vanessa Hart had arrived 3 months ago, filling every room with a tension that had not existed before. Elena finished putting away the towels and moved on to her next task, cleaning the windows in the east wing of the house. As she worked, she caught glimpses of the garden below, where a black car sat parked near the front gate, one of several vehicles that came and went from the property at all hours, driven by men who never introduced themselves and never stayed long. She had learned not to ask questions about those visits. It was safer that way, safer for her, and safer for Caleb, who needed her to keep this job for as long as possible. By the time evening came, the house had grown quiet again, the earlier chaos fading into the ordinary rhythm of the household routine. Elena finished her final tasks for the day and made her way toward the staff exit, her feet aching from hours of work. As she stepped outside into the cool evening air, she noticed Adrian standing near the garden, speaking quietly with one of the men who often visited the house. His expression was serious, focused, nothing like the calm control he had shown earlier in the hallway. He glanced up as Elena passed, their eyes meeting for just a brief second. Neither of them said anything. Elena continued walking toward the gate, but she could feel his gaze following her for a moment longer than she expected. She did not understand why he had defended her. She did not understand why a man like Adrian Cole, a man surrounded by danger and secrecy, would take a moment out of his day to correct his own fiancée in front of the staff over something as small as a broken vase. But as she walked toward the bus stop that would take her home to Caleb, she carried with her the strange, unsettling feeling that something in the house had shifted today, something small but real. And somewhere behind her, in the quiet garden of the Cole estate, Vanessa Hart stood at her bedroom window, watching Elena's figure disappear down the street, her jaw clenched tight with a promise she had no intention of breaking. This was far from over. 3 days passed before Elena noticed the first change. It came in the form of a small envelope tucked beneath the linen closet door, addressed simply to her name in neat handwriting. Inside was a note from the household accountant, informing her that her weekly pay had been adjusted upward, along with a brief line explaining that all household staff wages were being reviewed and updated. There was no mention of the vase, no mention of Vanessa, no mention of Adrian Cole at all. But Elena understood immediately that this was not a coincidence. She folded the note carefully and placed it in her bag, saying nothing to anyone. If this truly had come from Adrian, drawing attention to it would only make things more complicated, both for her and for him. She had learned enough about this house in 3 months to know that quiet gratitude was safer than public thanks. Margaret noticed anyway. The older woman had worked in the Cole household long enough to recognize patterns that others might miss. "You got one too," Margaret said one morning, as they folded fresh sheets together in the linen room. It was not a question. Elena glanced up. "Got what?" "The pay increase. I got mine yesterday." Margaret kept her voice low, even though they were alone. "It came right after everything with Miss Hart." Elena said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. "He does this sometimes," Margaret continued, folding a pillowcase with practiced hands. "Small things, things nobody can point to directly and say, this was because of that. He is careful that way. Why would he bother?" Elena asked, genuinely confused. "I am just staff. There must be a dozen people working in this house." Margaret gave her a long look, the kind an older woman gives when she sees something a younger person has not yet noticed about herself. There are 14 people working in this house, and he has never once done this for any of them before. Not in the 10 years I have been here. Elena did not know what to say to that. She turned back to the sheets, folding them a little too carefully, using the task to avoid meeting Margaret's eyes. 2 days later, Elena arrived for her shift, to find that her usual schedule had been quietly adjusted. Instead of working the long stretch from early morning until late evening 6 days a week, she was now scheduled for 5 days, with Wednesdays free. The note attached to the new schedule cited operational restructuring, the same vague language used in the wage increase. Elena used the extra day to take Caleb to a doctor's appointment he had been putting off for weeks, something she had not been able to manage with her old schedule. When she came home that evening, Caleb sat at their small kitchen table, doing his homework under the single working lamp in their apartment. "You seem happier today," Caleb said, not looking up from his math book. "I got an extra day off," Elena said, setting down 2 bags of groceries, more than she usually could afford. Caleb glanced up then, taking in the bags, the slightly lighter look on his sister's face. "Did something happen at that job? You have not talked about it much lately." Elena hesitated. She had never told Caleb the details of what she dealt with at the coal estate, never wanted to burden him with the fear that came with working in a house connected to dangerous men and dangerous business. "Things have gotten a little better," she said simply. Caleb did not push further, sensing that his sister preferred not to elaborate. He returned to his homework, and Elena began preparing dinner, grateful for a rare evening that felt almost normal. Back at the estate, the changes in Elena's circumstances had not gone unnoticed by everyone. Vanessa sat in the sitting room that overlooked the garden, a cup of untouched tea growing cold beside her, watching through the window as Elena walked across the courtyard carrying a basket of freshly cut flowers for the dining room centerpiece. Vanessa's eyes narrowed as she studied the maid's posture, the calm efficiency in her movements, the way the other staff members had begun greeting her with more warmth than before. Something had shifted, and Vanessa did not like it. She had asked around carefully, using casual conversation with the household accountant to learn about recent changes in staff wages and schedules. The accountant, a nervous man named Peter, who avoided conflict whenever possible, had confirmed that, yes, several adjustments had been made recently, though he insisted it applied to all staff equally. Vanessa did not believe that for a second. She thought back to the moment in the hallway, the way Adrian had crouched down to examine the broken glass, the way his voice had shifted when he addressed Elena directly. She had known Adrian for over a year now, long enough to understand that he rarely paid close attention to details that did not directly concern his business or his reputation. Yet he had paid very close attention to a shattered vase and a maid's version of events. That evening, Vanessa found Adrian in his study, going through papers at his desk, a glass of dark liquor sitting untouched beside a stack of documents. "You are still angry about the vase," Adrian said without looking up, sensing her presence at the doorway. "I am not angry about the vase," Vanessa said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. "I am curious about the staff wage increases and the new schedules, particularly for one member of staff." Adrian finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "I reviewed the household budget. Some adjustments were overdue." "For everyone?" Vanessa asked, crossing her arms. "For everyone," Adrian confirmed, his tone even. Vanessa studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of deception, any flicker that might reveal the truth beneath his calm exterior. But Adrian Cole had built an entire career on maintaining an unreadable expression, and he was not about to let that skill fail him now, not in his own study, not with the woman he was set to marry. "Fine," Vanessa said finally, though the word carried none of the acceptance it was meant to imply. "I only worry about appearances. People talk, Adrian. If it looks like you are showing favoritism toward one member of the staff, it reflects poorly on both of us." "Nobody is talking," Adrian said, returning his attention to the documents on his desk. "And even if they were, I do not concern myself with idle gossip among people who clean floors for a living." The dismissiveness in his tone seemed to satisfy Vanessa slightly, enough that she nodded and turned to leave the study. But as she reached the door, she paused. "I still think she should be let go," Vanessa said quietly. "Not because of the vase. I have a feeling about her, She does not belong here." Adrian did not respond, and after a moment, Vanessa left, closing the door softly behind her. Alone in his study, Adrian set down the papers he had been reviewing and sat back in his chair, staring at nothing in particular. He thought about the hallway 3 days earlier, the pattern of broken glass on the floor, the calm way Elena had accepted Vanessa's accusation, without arguing or making excuses, even when she clearly had done nothing wrong. He had seen many people in his life react to false accusations with anger, with desperate pleading, with tears meant to earn sympathy. Elena had done none of that. She had simply accepted what was happening and prepared to leave quietly, protecting whatever dignity she had left, rather than begging to keep a job she clearly needed. It was a small thing, but it had stayed with him. He had asked Peter, the accountant, to quietly look into Elena's file the following morning, telling himself it was simply due diligence, the kind of background check he ran on anyone who worked closely within his household. What he found had surprised him more than he expected. Elena Marsh, 26 years old, had been the sole guardian of her younger brother since their parents died in an accident 4 years earlier. She worked this job at the estate, along with occasional evening shifts at a small diner near her apartment, though the diner job had recently been dropped from her schedule, likely because the estate work alone barely covered their expenses as it was. Her brother, 14 years old, attended the local public school and had no record of trouble, only a note in an old school file mentioning that a teacher had expressed concern about the boy working part-time jobs he was too young to legally hold, something the school had apparently overlooked given the family's circumstances. Adrian had read through the file twice, something he rarely did with staff background checks. There was nothing remarkable about the information itself. Thousands of people across the city faced similar struggles, working multiple jobs to support younger siblings or aging parents, quietly carrying burdens that most of the world never noticed. But something about Elena's quiet composure in that hallway, paired with the reality of what she carried outside of these walls, had struck a chord in him that he did not fully understand. He was not a man who allowed sentiment to interfere with his decisions. In his line of work, sentiment was a weakness that others could exploit, a crack in the armor that enemies would find and widen without hesitation. Yet here he was, adjusting staff wages and schedules, based on the quiet dignity of a maid he had exchanged perhaps a dozen sentences with in 3 months. He told himself it was simply the right thing to do, nothing more. A hard-working employee deserved fair treatment, and correcting an obvious injustice was not the same as developing feelings for someone he barely knew. He told himself this, and mostly, he believed it. Over the following weeks, small interactions between Adrian and Elena became slightly more frequent, though never in ways that would draw attention from the rest of the household staff. He would occasionally pass her in the hallway and offer a brief nod, something he rarely did with staff members before. Once, when she was struggling to carry a large box of supplies up the back staircase, he had appeared seemingly out of nowhere and taken the heavier end without a word, carrying it up alongside her before disappearing back into his study. Elena found herself confused by these small gestures, unsure how to interpret them. She had grown up learning to be cautious around men who held power over her circumstances, understanding that kindness sometimes came with hidden expectations attached. But nothing about Adrian's behavior suggested anything beyond simple decency, and slowly, cautiously, she allowed herself to stop bracing for a hidden motive that never seemed to appear. Vanessa, meanwhile, grew more watchful with each passing week. She began finding small excuses to appear wherever Elena happened to be working, observing quietly from a distance, cataloging every small interaction between her fiancé and the maid she had tried to have fired weeks earlier. She noticed the way Adrian's expression softened, just slightly, whenever Elena was in the room. She noticed how Elena, despite her clear exhaustion from working long hours, always seemed to brighten slightly when Adrian walked past. Nothing improper had happened between them, nothing that Vanessa could point to as evidence of wrongdoing. But she recognized the early signs of something dangerous forming, something that threatened everything she had worked to secure for herself. Vanessa had not fought her way into this engagement, into this life of wealth and status, only to watch it slip away because of a maid who cleaned toilets and folded laundry for a living. She began making plans of her own, quiet and careful, the same way Adrian had quietly adjusted Elena's wages weeks earlier. If subtle kindness was Adrian's method of showing favor, Vanessa would need something more decisive to remove the threat entirely. She just needed the right opportunity. It came sooner than she expected. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, when Adrian left the estate for an unexpected business meeting that would keep him away until late in the evening, Vanessa watched his car disappear down the long driveway from her bedroom window, then turned back into the room with a slow, deliberate smile forming on her lips. She walked to her jewelry box, opened it carefully, and studied the collection of expensive pieces inside, most of them gifts from Adrian over the course of their relationship. Her fingers stopped on a delicate gold bracelet, one of the more valuable pieces in her collection, a family heirloom that had belonged to Adrian's mother before she passed it down to him, and he in turn had given it to Vanessa as a symbol of their future together. Vanessa held the bracelet for a long moment, turning it over in her hands, considering the weight of what she was about to do. Then, with careful precision, she wrapped the bracelet in a small cloth and slipped it into her pocket, formulating the details of a plan that would finally, permanently, remove Elena Marsh from this house and from Adrian's life. Elena, unaware of the storm quietly gathering against her, continued her work that afternoon exactly as she always did, humming softly to herself as she dusted the shelves in the upstairs study, entirely unaware that somewhere in the house, a trap was already being carefully set into motion. The following morning began like any other. Elena arrived early, greeted Margaret and the rest of the staff, and began her usual rounds through the east wing of the house. She had no reason to suspect that anything was wrong, no reason to notice the way Vanessa watched her from the top of the staircase with a strange, satisfied calm. It was nearly noon when the shouting began. "It is gone! My bracelet is gone!" Vanessa's voice rang through the upstairs hallway, sharp with practiced panic. Doors opened along the corridor as staff members stepped out to see what was happening, and within minutes, nearly the entire household had gathered near the top of the staircase. "What bracelet?" Margaret asked carefully, stepping forward. "The gold one. Adrian's mother's bracelet," Vanessa said, her voice trembling in a way that seemed almost too perfect, too rehearsed for someone genuinely distraught. "I kept it in my jewelry box, and now it is gone. Someone has taken it." The staff exchanged nervous glances. Theft within the household was rare, and an accusation involving an heirloom connected to Adrian's family was serious enough to bring genuine fear into the room. "We should search the staff quarters," Vanessa said, her eyes sweeping across the gathered group before landing, deliberately, on Elena. All of them. Elena felt her stomach tighten, though she kept her expression steady. She had done nothing wrong, and she reminded herself of that fact even as the weight of Vanessa's gaze settled on her like a physical pressure. "That seems reasonable," Margaret said slowly, though her tone suggested she did not fully trust the situation unfolding in front of her. "We can check the staff lockers downstairs." The group moved down to the small room near the kitchen, where staff members kept their personal belongings during work hours. One by one, coats and bags were opened and checked, the atmosphere growing more tense with each empty search. Elena's bag sat near the back of the room, and she watched with growing unease as Vanessa insisted on checking it personally rather than allowing Margaret or another staff member to do so. "This one," Vanessa said, reaching for Elena's worn canvas bag. "I did not take anything," Elena said quietly, though her voice carried none of the panic she felt building inside her. "Then you will not mind if I look," Vanessa replied, her tone sweet in a way that felt more threatening than any shout could have been. Vanessa opened the bag slowly, reaching inside with deliberate care. For a moment, nothing happened, and Elena allowed herself a flicker of hope that perhaps this would end without incident. Then Vanessa's hand emerged, holding a small cloth bundle, which she unwrapped to reveal the gold bracelet, gleaming under the kitchen lights. Gasps spread through the small room. Elena stared at the bracelet in disbelief, her mind racing to understand how something she had never touched could have appeared inside her own bag. "I did not put that there," Elena said, her voice rising for the first time, panic finally breaking through her composure. "I have never seen that bracelet before in my life." "It was in your bag," Vanessa said, her expression a careful mixture of shock and disappointment, though something colder flickered behind her eyes, something that Elena, in her distress, Did not notice, but Margaret did. This does not make sense, Margaret said slowly, stepping closer to examine the situation. Elena has never given anyone reason to doubt her honesty. People do desperate things when they need money, Vanessa said, her voice carrying just enough sympathy to sound convincing to anyone who did not know better. I am not angry. I understand hardship can push people toward difficult choices. But I cannot have a thief working in this house. I am not a thief, Elena said, her voice shaking now, though she fought to keep herself composed. She thought of Caleb, of the rent due in less than a week, of everything that depended on this job. Please, someone must believe me. The staff members shifted uncomfortably, torn between their genuine fondness for Elena and the undeniable evidence sitting in Vanessa's open palm. Nobody wanted to accuse Vanessa of lying, not when doing so could put their own jobs at risk, but nobody fully believed that Elena, who had worked honestly and quietly for months, would suddenly steal a family heirloom in such an obvious, careless way. I am calling Adrian, Vanessa announced, already pulling out her phone. He needs to know immediately. Elena's heart sank. She had no way to prove her innocence, no evidence beyond her own word against Vanessa's carefully constructed accusation. She thought about simply leaving, walking away before things grew worse. But something inside her refused to accept the label of thief without a fight. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let this lie define the rest of her life. Adrian arrived within the hour, his expression unreadable as he stepped into the staff room where the small group still waited, the tension thick enough to feel in the air. Vanessa immediately launched into her explanation, describing how she had discovered the bracelet missing, how the staff had searched the lockers, how the item had been found in Elena's bag. Adrian listened without interrupting, his eyes occasionally flicking toward Elena, who stood pale and silent near the back of the room, her arms wrapped around herself as though trying to hold herself together. Elena, Adrian said finally, his voice calm but carrying a weight that silenced the room instantly. Did you take the bracelet? No, Elena said immediately, meeting his eyes directly, refusing to look away despite the fear churning inside her. I have never touched that bracelet. I did not even know it existed until it appeared in my bag just now. Adrian studied her for a long moment. The rest of the room held its breath, waiting to see how he would respond, whether he would believe the maid or his own fiancée. The security cameras, Adrian said slowly, turning toward Vanessa. We have cameras covering the staff quarters and the main hallways. If someone placed that bracelet in Elena's bag, the footage will show it. Vanessa's expression flickered, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough for Adrian to notice. Of course, she said quickly, recovering her composure. Check the footage. It will only confirm what we already know. I intend to, Adrian said, already turning toward the door that led to the security office at the back of the house. The group followed him in tense silence, filing into the small room where a wall of monitors displayed feeds from various cameras positioned throughout the estate. Adrian sat down at the control station, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard as he pulled up footage from earlier that morning, specifically the hallway leading to the staff quarters. Elena stood near the back of the room, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. She had no idea what the footage would show, only a desperate hope that somehow, somewhere, the truth would reveal itself. The footage began to play, showing the empty hallway in the early morning hours, timestamps ticking steadily in the corner of the screen. For several minutes, nothing happened, just the quiet stillness of an empty corridor before the household staff arrived for the day. Then, at exactly 7:14 in the morning, a figure appeared in the frame. Vanessa, moving quickly and quietly down the hallway, glancing over her shoulder twice before slipping into the staff room where the lockers and bags were kept. The footage showed her opening Elena's bag, placing something small wrapped in cloth inside, then closing it again and hurrying back out of the room just as quickly as she had entered. The room fell into stunned silence. Every eye turned toward Vanessa, whose face had gone completely white, her earlier confidence evaporating entirely under the weight of undeniable evidence playing out on the screen in front of everyone. That is not what it looks like, Vanessa stammered, her voice losing all of its earlier smoothness. I was checking on something. I was not planting anything. You are seen placing a wrapped item into Elena's bag at 7:14 this morning, Adrian said, his voice dangerously quiet now, quieter than Elena had ever heard it. 2 hours before you claimed to discover the bracelet missing. Explain that to me. Vanessa opened her mouth, searching for words that would not come. The silence stretched on, heavy and damning, as everyone in the room waited for an explanation that clearly did not exist. I did it for us, Vanessa finally said, her voice cracking with desperation rather than sympathy now. Adrian, she is a distraction. I have seen the way you look at her, the way you defend her. I was trying to protect what we have built together. By framing an innocent woman for theft, Adrian said, his tone flat, devoid of any warmth that might have once existed between them. By nearly destroying her ability to support her family over a lie you constructed to eliminate someone you saw as a threat. She is beneath you, Vanessa said, her composure fully collapsing now, months of quiet resentment spilling out all at once. She cleans your floors, Adrian. She has nothing. I have given you everything. My family's connections, my reputation, my entire life, and you would throw that away for someone like her? The room had gone completely silent, every staff member frozen in place, watching the collapse of a relationship unfold in real time. Elena stood near the back, her mind still reeling from the shock of nearly being labeled a thief, unsure how to process the accusations now being hurled in an entirely different direction. Adrian stood slowly from the chair in front of the monitors, his expression carved from stone. You will pack your things, he said quietly. You will leave this house today, and this engagement is over. Adrian, please, Vanessa said, her voice breaking now, genuine desperation replacing her earlier calculated performance. You cannot be serious. Over a maid? This is not about Elena, Adrian said, though even as he spoke the words, something in his tone suggested otherwise, something that Elena noticed, despite her own shock. This is about the fact that you were willing to destroy an innocent person's life to protect your own interests. That tells me everything I need to know about who you truly are. Vanessa stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of hesitation, any crack in his resolve that she might exploit. But Adrian's expression remained unmoved, and finally, with tears now streaming freely down her face, Vanessa turned and stormed out of the room, her earlier elegance completely abandoned in her retreat. The staff room remained silent for several long moments after she left. Slowly, staff members began filing out, whispering quietly among themselves, though careful to keep their voices low enough that Adrian would not overhear. Elena remained standing near the back of the room, still trying to process everything that had just happened. Adrian turned toward her, his expression softening slightly as their eyes met. I am sorry, he said quietly. You should never have had to endure that. Thank you, Elena said, her voice still shaky from the ordeal, for believing me. For checking the footage before assuming the worst. I would never assume the worst about someone without evidence, Adrian said, though something in his voice carried a weight beyond simple fairness, something Elena could not quite name but felt nonetheless. She nodded, unsure what else to say, and quietly excused herself to return to her work, her hands still trembling slightly as she walked down the hallway that had, only hours earlier, nearly cost her everything. Behind her, Adrian remained standing in the security room, staring at the now blank monitor, his mind turning over everything that had unfolded that day. The engagement was over, the truth had been revealed, and somewhere beneath the anger he still felt toward Vanessa's betrayal, another feeling had begun to surface. One he could no longer ignore or explain away as simple professional concern. He thought of Elena's steady voice, insisting on her innocence, her refusal to break down, even when the evidence seemed stacked entirely against her. He thought of the quiet strength she carried, day after day, without ever asking for recognition or reward. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Adrian Cole found himself uncertain about something in his own life, uncertain in a way that had nothing to do with business rivals or dangerous deals, and everything to do with the quiet maid who had, without ever intending to, changed something fundamental within the walls of his carefully controlled world. The phone call came 2 days after Vanessa left the estate, and it arrived with a tone that made Adrian's jaw tighten the moment he answered. You embarrassed my daughter in front of your entire staff. said the voice on the other end, cold and clipped. It belonged to Franklin Hart, Vanessa's father, a man whose business dealings ran parallel to Adrian's own world, in ways that made this call far more dangerous than an ordinary family dispute. You ended an engagement that took months to arrange, over some maid. Your daughter framed an innocent employee for theft, Adrian said evenly, though his grip on the phone tightened. I have the footage to prove it. This is not a matter for negotiation. Everything is a matter for negotiation, Franklin said, his tone shifting into something quieter, more threatening. You know how this works, Adrian. Our families do business together. This engagement was never just about Vanessa and you. It secured agreements that other people are counting on. Adrian's expression hardened. He understood exactly what Franklin meant. The engagement had been more than a romantic arrangement. It had been a bridge connecting two powerful families, whose combined influence protected certain business interests neither wanted exposed. Ending it did not simply break a promise between two people. It threatened to unravel arrangements that other dangerous men had built their livelihoods around. I will not marry a woman capable of destroying an innocent person's life over jealousy, Adrian said. If that decision has consequences, I will deal with them. You will deal with them, Franklin repeated, his voice dropping lower. Understand something, Adrian. There are people in this arrangement who will not accept a broken deal quietly. I suggest you reconsider before this becomes something neither of us can control. The call ended abruptly, leaving Adrian standing alone in his study, the quiet threat hanging heavy in the air around him. He had built his position through years of careful strategy, understanding precisely how far he could push before pushing too far. Franklin Hart's warning was not empty. Men in their world did not make idle threats. Adrian spent the following days moving through the house with a tension that even the staff noticed, though nobody dared ask what troubled him. He increased security around the property, adding extra men at the gates, reviewing surveillance footage more frequently than usual, his instincts sharpening in response to a threat he could sense building somewhere beyond his immediate sight. Elena noticed the shift in atmosphere as well, though she could not name its exact cause. The staff whispered among themselves about the sudden increase in security, about unfamiliar cars occasionally parked near the estate's perimeter, about Adrian's shorter temper and longer hours locked away in his study. She told herself it was not her concern. She was simply staff, someone who cleaned and organized and stayed quietly in the background of a world that operated by rules she did not fully understand. But something about the tension in the house made her uneasy, in a way she could not shake, especially each time she caught Adrian watching her from across a room, with an expression that seemed to carry more weight than simple observation. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after Vanessa's departure, Elena stayed later than usual to finish organizing the study, a task Adrian had specifically requested she handle personally, citing her attention to detail. The rest of the staff had already left for the night, and the house had settled into the quiet stillness that came after dark. She was reaching to place a stack of documents onto the highest shelf when she heard the study door open behind her. You are still here, Adrian said, stepping into the room, his tie loosened, his expression tired in a way she had not seen before. I wanted to finish before I left, Elena said, setting the last of the documents into place. I did not realize how late it had gotten. You should go home, he said, though he made no move to leave the doorway. It is not safe to be out too late right now. Elena paused, turning to face him fully. Is something wrong? The staff has noticed the extra security. Adrian hesitated, weighing how much to share with someone who technically had no reason to know the details of his personal or business affairs. But something about Elena's steady presence, the same steadiness that had carried her through false accusations without breaking, made him want to speak honestly, if only for a moment. Ending things with Vanessa created complications, he said finally. Her father is not someone who accepts broken arrangements easily. There have been threats. Because of me, Elena said quietly, the realization settling heavily in her chest. This is because you defended me. This is because Vanessa chose to frame an innocent person rather than admit her own insecurities, Adrian corrected firmly. None of this is your fault, Elena. Do not carry blame that does not belong to you. Elena looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for any hint of resentment, any sign that he regretted the choice he had made in that hallway weeks earlier. defending a maid over the woman he had once planned to marry. She found none. "I should still be careful," she said quietly. "For Caleb's sake, if nothing else." "I have already arranged additional protection near your apartment," Adrian said, his tone shifting into something more businesslike, though the concern beneath it remained clear. "A car will follow you home tonight, and men will monitor the area discreetly over the coming weeks, until I am certain the situation has settled." Elena's eyes widened slightly. "You did not need to do that." "I did," Adrian said simply. "You are involved in this because of decisions I made, not decisions you made. I will not leave you and your brother exposed to danger because of my choices." The weight of his words settled between them, filling the quiet study with something neither of them fully addressed aloud. Elena felt her throat tighten, unsure how to respond to a level of protection and concern she had never expected from someone in his position. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice softer than before. Adrian nodded, though he did not move from where he stood, his eyes lingering on her a moment longer than necessary. "Elena," he said slowly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." She waited, her heart beating a little faster despite herself. "Do you feel safe here, working in this house, knowing what kind of world I operate in?" His voice carried genuine uncertainty, a rare crack in the controlled composure he usually maintained. "I would understand if you wanted to leave. I could arrange a position elsewhere, somewhere far removed from any of this danger." Elena considered the question carefully before answering. She thought of the months she had spent within these walls, the quiet kindnesses that had slowly rebuilt her trust in people who held power over her circumstances, the strange, unexpected sense of safety she had come to feel in this house, despite everything happening around it. "I do not want to leave," she said finally, surprising herself with the certainty in her own voice. "Not because of the job or the money, though I need both. I do not want to leave because of you." The words hung in the air between them, more honest than either of them had intended to be in that moment. Adrian's expression shifted, something guarded finally beginning to soften. "That is dangerous to admit," he said quietly, though there was no warning in his tone, only quiet acknowledgement. "I know," Elena said, holding his gaze steadily despite the vulnerability of the moment. "I have thought about it, Adrian, about why you defended me that day, why you have been so careful about my well-being since. I do not think it is simple kindness anymore." Adrian stepped closer, closing the distance between them slowly, deliberately, as though giving her every opportunity to step back if she wished to. She did not. "It stopped being simple kindness weeks ago," he admitted quietly. "I have tried to convince myself otherwise, told myself it would be reckless, unfair to you, given everything happening around us. But I cannot pretend any longer that what I feel toward you is only professional concern." Elena's breath caught slightly, the weight of his words settling over her with a mixture of fear and quiet hope. She thought of Caleb, of the danger now surrounding this house, of the uncertainty of building any kind of future with a man whose world operated by rules far more dangerous than her own. But she also thought of every quiet moment over the past weeks that had slowly, steadily earned her trust in a way nothing else in her life had managed to do. "This is complicated," she said softly. "It is," Adrian agreed, "and I will not pretend it comes without risk, both to you and to Caleb. If Franklin Hart or the people connected to him learn that my feelings toward you go beyond simple employment, it changes the nature of the threat we are already facing." "Then why tell me now?" Elena asked. "Why not wait until things are safer?" "Because pretending otherwise felt dishonest," Adrian said, "and because I am tired of controlling every part of my life except the one part that actually matters." The study fell silent again, the weight of everything unspoken finally beginning to settle into something clearer between them. Elena knew the danger surrounding this decision was real, that stepping further into Adrian's world meant accepting risks she had never anticipated when she first began working in this house. But she also understood, with a clarity that surprised her, that she no longer wanted to walk away from what had slowly grown between them, danger or not. Outside the estate, in a car parked just beyond the property's front gate, two men sat watching the house through the darkness, their presence unnoticed by anyone inside. One of them lifted a phone to his ear, speaking quietly into the receiver. "They are still inside together," the man said. Just the two of them. No security nearby. On the other end of the call, Franklin Hart's voice was calm, calculating. The same coldness that had colored his conversation with Adrian days earlier now sharpened into something far more dangerous. "Good," Franklin said. "Let them have their moment. It will make what comes next so much more effective." The line went dead, and the two men outside the gate settled deeper into the shadows, waiting patiently for the right opportunity to act on instructions that would soon shatter the fragile peace forming inside the walls of the Cole estate. 3 days later, Elena's phone rang while she was walking Caleb home from school, and the number on the screen was unfamiliar. "Elena Marsh?" a man's voice asked when she answered, calm but businesslike. "Yes," she said cautiously, pulling Caleb slightly closer as they walked. "My name does not matter. I am calling on behalf of Franklin Hart. He would like to meet with you. Alone, tonight." Elena's stomach dropped. "I do not understand. Why would Mr. Hart want to speak with me?" "He believes you are the reason his daughter's engagement ended," the man said flatly. "He would like the opportunity to discuss that with you directly, before he decides how to handle the matter with Mr. Cole." "I am not going to meet him alone," Elena said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. "That is unfortunate," the man replied, his tone shifting into something colder. "Because your brother walks home alone from the library most Tuesday evenings. It would be a shame if something happened to him because you refused a simple conversation." The line went dead before Elena could respond, leaving her standing frozen on the sidewalk, Caleb looking up at her with growing concern. "Elena? What is wrong?" he asked, noticing the color drain from her face. "Nothing," she said quickly, forcing a calm she did not feel. "Just a mix-up at work. Come on, let us get home." She walked the rest of the way in tense silence, her mind racing through every possible option. She could not risk Caleb's safety, but she also understood that meeting Franklin Hart alone, without informing Adrian, was reckless in ways she could not fully calculate. Yet involving Adrian meant risking an even larger confrontation, one that might escalate beyond anything she could control. That evening, after settling Caleb in front of his homework with strict instructions not to leave the apartment, Elena made her decision. She called Adrian. "They contacted me," she said, the moment he answered, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Franklin Hart wants to meet tonight. They threatened Caleb." Adrian's voice hardened instantly. "Where are you supposed to meet him?" "An address near the old warehouse district. I do not know exactly what they want." "You are not going alone," Adrian said firmly. "I am sending someone to stay with Caleb immediately, and I will meet you there myself." "Adrian, if you show up, it could make things worse," Elena said, though even as she spoke the words, she felt a small measure of relief, knowing he would not let her face this threat by herself. "If I do not show up, they will assume they control this situation entirely," Adrian said. "That is more dangerous than any confrontation tonight." Within the hour, 2 of Adrian's men arrived at Elena's apartment, positioning themselves discreetly outside to watch over Caleb, while Elena traveled toward the warehouse district, in a car Adrian had sent for her. Her hands remained clenched tightly in her lap throughout the drive, her mind replaying every possible outcome of the conversation ahead. The warehouse district sat quiet and mostly abandoned at this hour, rows of dark buildings stretching along cracked pavement, the occasional flicker of a streetlight casting long shadows across empty lots. The car pulled to a stop outside a warehouse with a single light glowing near its entrance, and Elena stepped out slowly, her heart pounding. Adrian was already there, standing near the entrance, his expression sharp and focused, several of his own men positioned discreetly nearby, though careful to remain out of immediate sight. "Stay close to me," Adrian said quietly as Elena approached. "Whatever happens, let me handle the conversation." Together, they stepped into the warehouse, where Franklin Hart stood waiting near a small table, flanked by 2 men whose stern expressions matched the tension already thick in the air. Franklin's eyes moved between Adrian and Elena, a thin, calculating smile forming on his lips. "I did not expect you to come as well, Adrian," Franklin said, his tone deceptively pleasant. "This conversation was meant for the maid." "Anything you have to say to Elena, you can say in front of me," Adrian replied, his voice carrying a quiet authority that filled the space between them. Franklin studied Adrian for a long moment before shifting his attention back to Elena. You have caused quite a lot of trouble, young woman. My daughter's engagement, months of careful planning, all unraveled because Adrian decided a maid's honor mattered more than the arrangements our families built together. Your daughter framed an innocent person for theft, Elena said, finding her voice despite the fear still gripping her chest. I did nothing except refuse to accept blame for something I never did. Details, Franklin said dismissively, waving a hand through the air. The point remains that this arrangement served important purposes beyond romance, purposes now left unresolved. State what you actually want, Franklin, Adrian said, his patience clearly thinning. I did not come here to discuss the past. I came to hear what you intend regarding the future. Franklin's smile widened slightly, though it carried no warmth. I want compensation. A financial arrangement that acknowledges the damage done to my family's reputation and to the business agreements this engagement was meant to secure. In exchange, I am willing to let this matter rest quietly, without further complications for you, Adrian, or for your new companion here. And if I refuse? Adrian asked evenly. Then perhaps the story of your fiancé's dishonesty finds its way to certain business partners who value discretion above all else, Franklin said, his tone sharpening. Reputation matters greatly in our world, Adrian. You know this better than most. The threat hung heavy in the warehouse, and Elena watched as Adrian's expression remained carefully neutral, calculating every possible response before speaking again. You threatened a 14-year-old boy to arrange tonight's meeting, Adrian said slowly. That was a mistake, Franklin. One that changes the nature of this entire conversation. Franklin's confident expression flickered slightly. I made no threats against any child. I simply arranged a meeting. Your man made the threat explicitly, over a recorded call, Adrian said, and for the first time, a small, dangerous edge crept into his voice. I have people reviewing that recording as we speak, along with documentation of tonight's location and the identities of everyone standing in this warehouse. Franklin's men shifted uneasily, glancing toward their employer for guidance he did not immediately provide. You would not dare expose this conversation, Franklin said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. It would expose your own business as much as mine. Perhaps, Adrian said calmly, but I have far more resources to weather that exposure than you do, Franklin. Your business relies heavily on discretion and quiet arrangements. Mine can survive scrutiny that yours cannot. Threaten an innocent child again, and I will make certain every partner you rely on learns exactly what kind of man they are truly dealing with. The warehouse fell into tense silence, Franklin's careful composure cracking under the weight of Adrian's steady, calculated threat. Elena watched, her heart still racing, as the balance of power in the room shifted decisively away from the man who had summoned them there. This does not need to become a war between our families, Adrian continued, his tone softening slightly, though the underlying warning remained clear. I am willing to maintain the business agreements our families originally established, separate entirely from any personal matters between Vanessa and myself. But threats against people under my protection end tonight, permanently. Franklin studied Adrian for a long moment, weighing his options carefully. Finally, with visible reluctance, he nodded. Fine, the business arrangements remain intact, but this matter between us is settled. I want no further involvement with either of you. Agreed, Adrian said simply. Franklin turned and walked out of the warehouse without another word, his men following closely behind, leaving Adrian and Elena standing alone in the dim light, the tension slowly beginning to drain from the air around them. Elena let out a breath she had not realized she was holding, her legs suddenly feeling unsteady beneath her. Adrian moved quickly to her side, steadying her with a gentle hand at her back. It is over, he said quietly. Caleb is safe. You are safe. Thank you, Elena said, her voice trembling with relief. For coming, for protecting us. I told you I would not leave you exposed to danger because of my choices, Adrian said, his expression softening as he looked at her. I meant that. They stood together in the quiet warehouse for a long moment, the weight of the danger finally beginning to lift from their shoulders. Elena looked up at him, and for the first time since this entire ordeal had begun weeks earlier, she allowed herself to fully believe that whatever existed between them was worth the risk it carried. In the weeks that followed, life at the Cole estate slowly settled into a new, steadier rhythm. Franklin Hart kept his word, maintaining distance from both Adrian and Elena, the business arrangements between their families continuing quietly without further incident. The extra security around the property gradually relaxed, though Adrian remained careful, never allowing himself to grow entirely complacent about the world he operated within. Elena continued working at the estate, though her role within the household began shifting in ways the staff quietly noticed but never openly discussed. Adrian's attention toward her grew less careful about appearances, his affection becoming something the entire household eventually came to recognize and, more importantly, to respect. Margaret, who had watched the entire situation unfold from the very beginning, found herself smiling more often these days, pleased to see the quiet dignity Elena had always carried finally being met with the recognition it deserved. Caleb, too, noticed the changes in his sister's life, the growing sense of security that had settled over their small apartment in recent weeks. Though Elena remained careful about how much she shared regarding the details of Adrian's world, she made certain her brother understood that he was loved, protected, and no longer carrying the weight of their family's survival entirely alone. 6 months after the night in the warehouse, Adrian asked Elena to marry him, not in a grand gesture meant to impress onlookers, but in a quiet moment, in the same study where he had first admitted his feelings toward her, surrounded by the same books and papers that had witnessed the slow, careful growth of everything between them. Elena said yes without hesitation, understanding fully now the risks and rewards that came with loving a man like Adrian Cole, choosing him not, despite the danger his world carried, but because she had come to trust, completely, that he would always stand between her and that danger, exactly as he had from the very first moment he stepped into that hallway and refused to let a lie define her. The wedding was small, private, held in the same garden where Vanessa had once watched Elena's figure disappear down the street, with quiet resentment burning in her chest. This time, the garden held only warmth, only the quiet joy of two people who had found something real amid circumstances neither of them had ever expected. Elena Marsh, once a maid who had nearly lost everything over a lie, stood now as the true mistress of the Cole estate, not because of the title she carried, but because of the quiet strength and unwavering honesty that had, from the very beginning, made her impossible for Adrian to overlook. And within the walls of the house that had once tried to cast her out, Elena finally found the place she truly belonged.